Hello, huddlers. Welcome to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Recruit, Retain, Reactivate, Harvest Huddle Hour, R3H3. In this episode, we're going to discuss breaking down the big game draw, where you'll learn a breakdown of statistics and odds of drawing big game hunting opportunities in different zones throughout California. These R3H3 recordings are a resource designed by CDFW and the R3 team to bring more Californians to hunting, fishing, foraging, shooting sports, and just getting outdoors. They're meant for a beginner audience or those looking to gain knowledge around a new skill. If at any time you have questions, comments, concerns, or even an idea for an upcoming huddle, just reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Our email address is r3statewideprogram@wildlife.ca.gov. And now for our presentation on breaking down the big game draw. So for this big game draw huddle, we are going to be here in our virtual interview room because we do have some guests joining us from different parts of California. First, we have J.R. Young, our main presenter.
Hello.
Then we also asked Jen Benedict, the Assistant Deputy Director of CDFW Communications and avid big game hunter, to join us. Hello, Jen.
Hi.
Along with Taylor Williams, the Recruit, Retain, Reactivate R3 Coordinator for California.
Hi.
Perfect. Thank you all for being here and helping us navigate the 2022 draw. JR, do you want to tell us all a little bit more about yourself and then just jump right in?
Yeah, so my name's J.R. Young. I'm the Vice Chair of the North American Board of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I've been doing these presentations and putting this stuff together for the draws, just number one, to help people understand, but also I had to kind of create a system for myself to better give myself opportunities, whether it's California or other states, and trying to draw. And every state is different, has different quirks and uniqueness. And so, but with so many new hunters coming in to California, I've seen a lot of questions over the years of how to work through the draw. So so this is my presentation. And if I could figure out how to get my next slide, there we go. So a bit about me. I'm a Western States draw geek. I'm a recovering accountant, which I think that's relevant because what it is, an accountant, we have to be boringly objective. And that's how I've really tried to approach this, just purely looking at the numbers and the statistics and the odds and figuring out how to work through this system once you gain an understanding of the different tags, opportunities, tags, classifications, et cetera. We'll get into that. I love taking naps in the woods, as you can see. It's a very comfortable position for me. But most of the reason why I want to try and be successful in these draws is because I hunt for food. It's the main source of protein in our homes, in my home. And I love to cook everything about wild game. The picture here is a deer heart that I got last year in California. Or the heart from a deer I got here in California in my friend's wood-fired oven, and it was absolutely fantastic. So anytime I can increase my odds and opportunities to be successful, getting a tag and then further on that in the field, I'm always trying to take advantage of any opportunity out there. So really what this presentation is focused on is the big game digest. There's two big documents that I use, but number one really is the big game hunting digest. Everything that you need to typically know about hunting in California, how tags work, how deer tags work, deer tag classifications, first deer, second deer tag. Think terms like OTC, what does that mean? And then, of course, what I would call our big three draw, which would be elk, pronghorn, and bighorn sheep. Those draws tend to be a little bit simpler just because there's so few tags and so many people. Typically, if you're going to try and draw one of those tags, you're going to be in what's called the random. But I'll get to that. But most importantly, the big game hunting digest. It's available online. You can print it at home. You can read it online and mark up the file if you're sophisticated with using PDFs. But every year I read it cover to cover, well, digitally now, so page 1 to whatever the end page is. But I almost always find something new, or just a little bit of a tweak, or something that just catches my eye that I didn't pick up before. So it's, to me, for any hunter, especially any new hunter, picking these up, making sure that you're reading through them and trying to understand them will just help you get that base knowledge and that base vernacular and understanding the terms. And it'll give you advantages, many advantages going forward. So when we talk about the draw, we have to understand, what is it? Why do we have a draw? Why are some tags a draw and some tags I can just go out and buy? So the state, and this is true for most states in the West, is it's just a supply and demand issue, right? And so they had to create a system to create some sort of system for drawing. So what we do is, in California, we have what's called a modified preference point system. And in general, when you hear the word preference point, that typically means that most tags go to those with the highest amount of points. Those have been putting in for years and years and years and years. Preference is given to them to be able to draw tags. Bonus points are, other states have a bonus point system. Those are typically different. In a nutshell, often what they are is that for each bonus point that you have, you might get 2 extra tickets, or sometimes 3 extra tickets of basically called, like a raffle ticket, your name and a hat. So the more points you have, the more tickets you have in the bucket, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're given any other priority, other than you just have statistically higher odds. So for us, the drawing is a methodology of providing big game tags to hunters where the number of tags available have excess demand. So for deer tags, these are our premium tags because they're, like I said, they're at a premium. And then preference points create a priority to those who have entered the draw, and we give preference to them. And importantly, so between our deer tag drawing and our elk, pronghorn, and sheep drawing, we have different allocations between the draw. This is an important number because sometimes people get these crossed up a little bit. For deer tags, 90% of a deer tags that are available go to those with the highest point value. And then 10% is what's called draw by choice. We also call that the random. So you hear people talk about, oh, I drew it in the random. That's what that is. There's a pool of tags for leftover for those 10%. For elk, pronghorn, and bighorn sheep, it's split 75-25. And so no matter how many tags are on a specific hunt, allocated towards a specific hunt. So at the bottom here, you can see Bear Valley, General Methods Bull, this first one here. There's a tag quota of 2. One of those tags goes in the preference point drawing. One of them goes to the random. So they're always, so while you have these tags that statistically you can't get to 75%, 25% unless you have 4, one tag must be in the random draw. So let me jump back here real quick. For this Goodell period 1 bull hunt, this 373, there's 1 tag in the quota. So there is no preference opportunity here. It purely goes to the random. So it's open and available to all applicants. So that's specifically for our big 3, but I'll jump into deer here a little bit in a second. So deer tag classifications. What do they mean? A lot of people talk about this and they're like, well, how can I draw, what tags are draw, what tags aren't draw, what tags, and then there's the middle category, which is what I would call restricted. Or not what I call, it's what the department classifies it. So premium tags typically must always be drawn. And those, to be in a draw, that means on your application, you have 3 choices to make. You have your first tag and your second tag, but on your first tag, you have 3 opportunities. First choice, second choice, third choice. Typically, you put your first choice for if you want to try and draw that premium tag. With premium tags, the reason that we have premium, restricted, and unrestricted is it's purely created based on the prior year's demand on the tags. So if there's 100 tags for a hunt and 1,000 people applied for it, clearly it sells out right away. That tag then jumps to the classification, which will be a premium tag. Our X zones are all like this. This is what most people can identify as pretty easy. X zones has fewer tags typically per unit, and so there's much higher demand on them. So as I talk about this, the demand on the tags can vary from year to year, and some tags can jump classifications. It really is just a supply and demand issue that I talked about earlier. And then supply, what's really important to understand is, well, someone might say and look at, like, why are there tens of thousands of tags for A zone, but maybe there's only a couple hundred tags available for a given X zone? Well, a lot of that just depends on that supply varies by type of terrain, the access to the terrain, the success rates, and a host of other factors that are determined by the department biologists. They determine what type of threshold those deer herds can handle from a take perspective. If there's greater access and the terrain is much more open and available, which X zones often have, because it's high desert sagebrush country that's wide open. Very different would be the west slope of the Sierra. Lots of public land, lots of access, but typically very dense forest. It's harder to find deer. Deer know how to hide well. When the woods get busy in October. So those herds can sustain a much higher tag number. In some place like A zone, where I live, there's often a lot of private land, so access is lower. So just by having less hunters out, because there's a lot of private land intermixed, you may have less access. Therefore, your success rates potentially could be lower. So you can offer more tags based on what that offers. So, and then each year there's this image over to the right of the screen is an important one. I snapped it right from the Big Game Digest. It typically shows up in like the first 6 pages, and it says what's new in 2022, and the year changes every year, but it's the same thing. It's really important to understand this each year as you approach the draw, what it means for deer tag classifications, because some years there are some pretty significant changes. So last year, D6 was a premium tag. However, it didn't sell out in the draw because D6 is an abundant tag, and there wasn't a lot of demand on it. However, when tags first went on sale in July, I think July 2nd is the technical date that they go on sale, or maybe it is July 3rd, they sold out right away. So they're still at a high demand, but they're not at a premium demand. So they've dropped one level to the restricted level for the tag. Now that's important, because if you enter the draw on your first tag, but then you want to get a second tag, you can't buy this D6 tag until the draw happens. So one of the rules is that your second tag can be allocated towards it can't be used on a restricted tag if you have a pending first tag application drawing. So you have to wait till the draw happens we have to put in for the draw on June 2nd. Typically happens within 10 days after that. Then after that, you can go in, and then the first week of July, we can start to buy tags of what all is left over. So from unrestricted to restricted was D19. And again, D19 was, I don't know a whole lot about D19 down south, but just on paper, what I can tell you is that it was an unrestricted tag. So it didn't sell out until way late in the fall, probably even during the deer season. But for some reason last year, more people bought tags and it sold out before August. If it sells out before August, it goes up a classification to restricted. So there's just a little bit of breaks on those restricted classifications. You just have to put a little bit of brakes. You can't get them anytime. And then we have these tags that jumped from the top tier, from a premium tag to an unrestricted, because people didn't buy these tags until after August. And if the tag sells out after August, it's in the unrestricted level, because that premium isn't happening. It's waiting until almost all the way up until the season starts, depending upon the unit. And I can't tell you what A32 and D16 open dates are, but they weren't typically in that high demand. So this is a key thing to look at when you get into your digest, is looking for these tag classifications, because D6 can go into premium often, and if it does, then that means it has to be applied for through the draw, or you can wait and see if there's any leftover tags available. So this is a breakdown, and again, these tan images, they come right out of the Big Game Digest. So what are the premium deer tags for 2022? And these are going to be the tags that you would have to apply for when you submit your application for your first tag, first choice. If there's any of these tags that you want to draw. Most of them are, we have our general zone hunts, C, D9, D12, all of the X zones. Most people are people are typically familiar with the X zones hunts. They're in the Eastern Sierra typically. The terrain's a little bit different. We just don't have as many tags for them, but these are some of the tags that people look at for year after year. Now, X zones tags can vary quite a bit. Sometimes you can get an X zone tags for 2, 3, maybe 4 points. Or some of these X zone tags can really come at a high point level. I would highlight X5B. I believe it takes at least 15 points to draw that tag, and I'll get to that in a minute of the point thresholds that you need. But understanding in these tag classifications, they all don't take max points. They all take some very varied level of points. And again, that's back to the supply and demand. Maybe there's a few more tags and not as many people want to hunt the unit, or there's less tags and a lot of people want to hunt the unit, like X5B. So you kind of have to understand, and that's part of this planning process as you do this year after year. If you start to enter the draw, you start to look at how you can schedule this out. If there's a tag that only takes 3 points, maybe 4 points, you can understand that you can hunt that unit every 3 to 4 years. And you can start to plan your hunting seasons long term. And that's kind of what my motivation is for doing all this, is understanding this. Like, how often can I draw some of these tags? There's a lot of people in California that have max points. Max points is 20 this year. And they're building and building and building for that one great glory hunt. They might have, they might know the unit well, or they have an area that they can hunt year after year and have great hunts, but they really want that special tag. That would be our G3 hunt is a very, very popular hunt. G37 is another very popular hunt, and the M9 hunt. Those are probably our most popular, some of our most popular deer hunts. We do have a couple restricted tags this year, which last year we didn't have any restricted tags. So again, it's one of those things that you have to keep an eye on when you apply for it. And then unrestricted, A zone, B zone, D3 to 5, lots of hunting area, lots of area that you can hunt in. A, B, and D 3 to 5, you can hunt every year, year after year, and kind of start to build your hunting skill set, but also, find opportunities to hunt as you build your points for those, for the premium tags. So what I talk about points, what are points and how do you get them? So, how do you get into this preference system? A component of that is that each year you apply. So each year you put in for a premium tag on your first choice, on your first deer tag application, you don't draw, you gain a point. There's also an opportunity of like, well, maybe I can't hunt this year for whatever reason. So I just want a point only. I'm technically putting in for the draw, but I'm actually just trying to draw a point. And that's what you can do. So you can put in, there's a code called PD, has to be on your first choice. Again, this is really, really important. Everything that matters for points in California, the point system, it really only matters for your first choice on your first deer application. Same thing with the other 3 big species, but there's not 2 tags. So it's really that first choice slot. That's where everything happens. That's how you can gain them. That's how you can lose them if your choice there. You lose a point if you draw a premium tag with your first choice on your application. So, for example, if you put a premium tag, and this happens in C zone a lot, C is a very, very big unit, and it's a premium tag that doesn't really take any preference points, maybe 0 or 1. You can put C zone, and a lot of people do this as their second choice. And because when they do the first pass of the draw, there's not enough, they don't give out enough of the tags that first pass, they start going to second choices on people's applications. And it's typically only common with C zone. As I point out here, pay attention. Some tags become premium, others fall to restricted or unrestricted. This is very common with D6. It does this every other year. It almost it can bump from unrestricted to premium, and then currently this year it's in restricted, so it can vary. And then max points. A lot of people talk about, well, how many points did you have? Why have max? Well, how come max? Some people always ask the question, how come max points increases every year? Well, it increases because max points is really just how long people have been in the draw since 2002, and if they've never drawn a tag, or they've still only put in for point only, they're creating the max because we haven't yet burned through all those people with the highest point levels. A party application is when a group of hunters together want to put in for a particular hunt. This is common in deer hunts, and you can also do it for some of our other draws. For deer, that can be up to 6 people that can apply together. For elk pronghorn, there can be 2 people that can apply together. But there's no party apps for bighorn sheep. I think we're only getting out 27 tags this year, maybe 29. If you would apply on a party application, your points are average. So that's important to know. If for example, I think I have 13 deer points in California, and if I joined up with my buddy who had 0 points, we would average out to 6.5. And then that would create our point threshold. So I can pick him up to a higher level, even though he doesn't have any, or technically he can bring me down as we average our points. It's important to understand that, because some people, I've heard people say that, like, oh, well, one guy had in the application, he had max points. Why weren't we in the max point pool? Well, it's important that you understand that we average those points. And so you can understand where those thresholds are. And then it's really important on this bottom level, there are pitfalls that can be troublesome, is that if you apply for a hunt that doesn't have enough tags available, if you're in a party, sometimes your party can be passed over, or the party leader will be the only one to get the tag. This is important in the random draw, because sometimes, especially in that 90-10 split, I think of like the G3 tag. I think there's 2 random tags available. Well, if you apply for a party, it's very difficult to get that tag. And so if they're doing the random draw for those 2 tags, and the first person is, just some person draws that tag, the next person is you on your party application with your 2 buddies, they'll skip your name over because there's not enough tags available. For pronghorn or elk, the party leader, if there's 1 tag left and there's 2 people in the party leader will get the tag, and the other person will become the alternate for that tag. So that's a little bit of an important quirk as well. This is just me personally. I don't think it's necessarily the right or wrong decision, but I don't recommend people apply as a party, especially often for deer, unless there's a lot of tags available. Where you have that big random pool, just because your name could be skipped over. And if sometimes you just want to try and give yourself any advantage that you can get to draw. So again, this kind of circles back a little bit. There's 2 key pieces of information. The Big Game Digest has everything. It has all the language, talks about the rules, the regulations, the seasons, the season setting, all of that stuff is really important in the digest. And if you just had one document to look at, it could be the Big Game Digest. When you start to get to, if you've looked at this for multiple years, and you start to understand some of these big game drawings, you can actually get into the statistics, which breaks down how many people at each point level show up within the draw. Now, it's a lot more complicated, but you can understand how many people were in a pool that maybe were just below. If it took 3 points to draw the tag, you can look back at how many people had 2 points, and how many, if you assume that everybody at the highest point levels exhaust for that tag, how many people are coming up behind. And we have something, there's a concept that might hear people talk about, which is something called point creep. And that can happen when more and more people keep applying for tags, so it takes a higher number of points to draw. Now in California, we actually don't have that bad. There's a few X zones. I ran these numbers, and I would get way too off into the weeds if I did a presentation on it. But there's a few tags that are increasing each year. They might take one or maybe a half point or another point to draw. And some of those tags, I believe X12 is one, and X12, X2. Each year they take a few more points to draw. So that's something called. So you have to kind of plan for that as well. But if you get into the statistics, it's a lot of details. It's on big Excel spreadsheets, and you can really go down a rabbit hole on that.
JR, because I know that it is digital and something that we could easily pull up, can you go ahead and open up the Big Game Digest booklet online or in front of us right now and kind of walk us through some of the more important aspects and how to just kind of navigate that real quick?
So, and again, I can't stress enough, the Hunting Digest has everything that you need to know in it. Spend a lot of time reading it, and you'll really start to become familiar with many of these concepts. The first several pages, again, it talks about, where are your local licensing offices, what's new, fees, etc. It goes through all this, but I'm going to jump all the way down into, and here's the actual application if you were to submit a physical application, but it gives it gives you an understanding of how this lays out. You have your first deer tag drawing application. Remember, in the first box, this is how you gain and lose your points in this first choice for your tag. And then your second deer tag application, if you so want to put in for one. Otherwise, often you can wait till after the draw and decide to go pick up a tag, what we would call over the counter, on what any of those unrestricted tags that may be available, or the restricted tags that might be available at that point, like D6 or A zone, B zone, D3 to 5. Those are typically the most common ones with abundant tags year after year. This talks about some of the tag descriptions as we go through deer tags. A very important point this year when we talk about deer refunds. This has always been the case, but clearly the last couple of years we've had some challenges with fires and the Forest Service closing massive swaths of land. Unfortunately, we have to expect it to happen. It's frustrating. I wish it didn't have to be that way, but it may be a few years before some of these challenges alleviate, and a lot of it depends on, honestly, the challenges of the fires all across the West. If we have to dedicate resources to other states, it could be challenging. But the understanding how the exchanges work is really important right now. I'll highlight that. You can exchange a tag, not a premium, but you can exchange other tags as long as none of the seasons have started. So keep an eye on those dates. When does the earliest archery season start? So you're prepared if you need to make a change. Maybe you were in B zone and you decide you want to go over to D3 to 5. That's something that you can do, especially with those unrestricted tags. We typically don't offer deer tag refunds, so that's important to note. That's always been the case, but granted, it has been a little more challenging these last couple of years with some of the restrictions that have come along. The digest here talks about these deer tags classifications. It talks about how the first deer tag drawing application works, the second deer tag drawing, and then what you can use your first deer tag for. These are two important points. You can use your first deer tag to obtain the following. You can get a restricted deer hunt tag. You can get an unrestricted or leftover premium if you haven't applied in for the draw. A second deer tag can get in a restricted or unrestricted, so long as you don't have any pending draw. So that typically comes up after our drawing, and the results after they show up in the middle of June. Some party information here. Again, I covered this in the presentation, but it's all here for you to read. But I really want to get to is that when it comes down and it's time to put your application in, I want to show you some information here on the deer drawing statistics. Now, I talked about those Excel spreadsheets. They go into a lot more detail than here, but this is important to note because it gives you an idea of how the drawing works and how you can plan to hunt every year. So it goes through here are various hunt zones, and then we have our quotas. How many applicants put in on their first choice? How many of those first choice applicants have max points? How many tags do we award in that preference drawing? Again, so for deer tags, that 90%. How many of those in that 90% pool were awarded through the preference draw and they lost their point? What was the highest point value awarded? The really important one here is this lowest point, because this gives you an idea of how high the demand is on a unit. So I'll highlight, for example, X1 right here. There's a quota of 760 tags. That means 684 of them are going in the preference round, 76 are left over for the random draw. It typically drew between the highest point that somebody had was 10 points, but the lowest, and this is the important number, they drew if the lowest point awarded in the preference drawing was just 2 points. So in theory, this is what I would call a 2-point unit. You can draw this unit every 2 years because it takes 2 points. Now it might bump up to 3 next year. That's that concept of point creep that I talk about. But here's how you can go and understand this. Now you have tags like X1 that might take 2 points to draw, but X2 is 9 points. So it's drastically different. It's what I call a 9-year planning process. And these tag numbers can go up or down. And as we work down through the X zones, you see there's all different numbers of variables within this lowest point value awarded. And this is important to understand because it'll give you an idea of how long it takes to draw a tag. Now, I know X12 is up to 7 points. I believe 3 or 4 years ago, it was just 5. So that's that concept of point creep. There's more tags available or more applications than there are tags available. I know X12 tags were cut a couple of years ago. So again, that's a supply and demand level out, but there's more people going in for X12. So it takes 7 points now. X5B, it draws at the minimum point value is 16. So it's a very, very highly sought after unit. There's just 50 tags. So there's not a lot of tags available. They typically have very high success rates in the unit, but it's just hard to get that tag. And those are those toggles of supply, demand, terrain, success ratios, access, and those, hopefully the biologists come in and make tag number recommendations, being like, we can kill up to X amount of deer to still have and maintain a healthy herd to provide opportunity to hunters in California. So, and as you go through these deer drawing statistics, this gets into the apprentice hunts. These follow along the same rules, the general method hunts. So G3, I talked about, it's probably our most popular deer hunt, 25 tags for 4,640 applicants. Your odds are pretty low. And even there were individuals with max points. So if the awarded in the preference round is going to be 23, that's your 90%. There were still 220 applicants with 19 points. That means you're still looking at about a 10% chance of drawing, even if you've been putting in for 19 years for this tag. So it's still very, very, very high demand. And there's still more people in that max point pool than there are tags. However, we do allocate 2 to the random. So 2 of these individuals amongst these lucky 4,640 people kind of win the chance of a lifetime. And so you can draw in the random. It does happen. But again, you have to kind of look at your total odds here of how many total applicants are available, how high the point values are, and how many people come in at the random level. And then that's pretty common here. I'll touch just a little bit about, I'm going to scroll down here really quick and we'll just get into some of the elk hunts. And the concept between the elk, pronghorn, and bighorn sheep is all very, very much the same. And the reason being is that most of our hunts have very, very small tag quota numbers. They have very small tag quota numbers. They have a lot of applicants. I think on my other sheets, I was running numbers. I think there's something like 30 or 40,000 people that apply for elk tags, and our elk tag number a little under 400. Just rough numbers off the top of my head, but you can see that the odds are very, very long. Most of these tags have several hundred people applying for them with only a handful going through the preference drawing, and then at least one on every tag going into the random drawing. But you can understand how long those odds are for most of these elk hunts. And so part of the challenge here is really, if you're looking for your odds and attempt a drawing, is that find the opportunity with the lowest total of applicants. The best ratio between the lowest total applicants and the number of random tags, especially if you're just getting into the draw and you're not at that 19-point level because you've been applying since 2002. So if you're anywhere less than that, that's your only strategy really to try and give yourself an advantage. The odds are very, very long, but somebody does draw those tags every year. So it'd just be such a special opportunity, especially to be able to hunt elk in California. Elk is my favorite species to hunt by far. So I dream of one day having that success. Ideally, it could be a Thule elk because they're unique to California from my perspective. But I've also, taken a very sober approach to looking at the numbers, and I realized that my odds are very, very long. So I think with that, hopefully that gives you a good idea of how to work through this digest. Again, looking at it every year, understanding tag numbers can fluctuate a little bit, but there's always something to go in here and look at and try and understand a different concept. It can be daunting the first time that you look at it, but if you start to pick up just a few general concepts and build on that year after year, hopefully you can find yourself on a path to being successful throughout some of your hunts. So with that, I think I'll jump back over to the presentation and talk about if there's any questions out there that we can cover.
Cool. So yeah, we have Taylor with us kind of as, I don't want to say novice, but not as familiar with this topic, and then Jen, who is versed in the topic, to kind of see what kind of questions we could generate. Taylor, do you have any that you want to ask?
So JR, one of the questions I have for you, and this is a question that we get a lot at the department, is how do you carry the digest with you 24/7? Do you download it on your phone? Do you go and get it printed out somewhere? Or do you even take it with you into the field?
So I with the digest, even before it was digital only, I would always download it to my phone. So it's always available to me. Sometimes I find myself randomly having to quick check a data point. I do think nowadays, depending upon how people work, right? Some people can work in an all digital world. They can mark up various screens or take screenshots or do things that can work for them. I think if people are a little more old school and tactile, and I do think it's a great idea to print it out. I've still, I have older copies that I go back and look at, and I have handwritten notes in some of the columns and certain hunts circled with notes and comments. So it depends on how you work best, but always download one to your phone, because I think just about almost everybody has a smartphone these days. But also, again, if you're that tactile person and really likes to write notes and keep everything square away, I think downloading it and getting it printed is a great way to do so also.
Awesome. Yeah, we encourage people to download it on their phone, and we have resources to help people do that as well. But I was just wondering your personal preference. My next question is, could you elaborate more on people who might want to obtain one of the leftover tags that go out?
So after the draw happens, the results come out in the middle of June. There's a list as it runs up. Deer tags go on sale in early July. I believe, isn't it technically July 2nd, or is it the
JR, I messaged our staff at LRB, License and Revenue Branch, while you were talking. They say, in reference to leftover premium tags from the draw, if there are any premium deer hunt tags remaining after the big game drawing, applicants who have not been issued a restricted or premium tag may apply for purchase of any leftover premium deer tags starting at 8 a.m. on July 2nd. A list of available deer tags is accessible online. We'll put the website where they can go up, and that website will be updated daily once the draw concludes. So yeah, leftover premium deer tags go on sale 8 a.m. on July 2nd.
I'll say there's a key Google search term that I've always used is California deer tags available for sale. And that will typically show up as soon as it gets published to the CDFW website. Once those numbers and tag numbers are available, it'll show how many tags are left over across the state in various units, and then you can keep an eye on it. But you can monitor that and start to strategize and plan, but make sure that you don't act too late. But as soon as, like I said, late June, those available deer tags get published, and then you can take advantage of that. I think, and even I think after the draw, and you could tell me this better, that if there's an actual email that goes out that lists the number of tags available.
Yeah, there is an email that goes out with the remaining tags. So in order to be able to get that email, you'll need to log into your online license account and opt into our communications. If you struggle to figure out how to do that, you can just let the R3 team know, and we'll walk you through it.
So buy your license, subscribe to the CDFW mailing list,
Yep.
and then you'll get an extra source of information. But again, also keep that Google search handy. Again, available California deer tags for sale beginning in July. Definitely in July, that typically comes up the first search, and it's a direct link to a PDF file.
Perfect. And then my last question for you, and I have two questions, but they can kind of be lumped together. So I know you can go online and buy a preference point, or you can apply for the hunt, and if you don't get drawn, you get the preference point. Can you talk a little bit to when you should buy a preference point over applying for the hunt? And then also losing your points. How many years does it take before you lose your points?
Yeah, so it's personal preference, whether or not you want to apply for a point only or actually apply for a deer tag or another big game tag. For me personally, if you know that you absolutely can't hunt, maybe you have a family vacation planned or some other commitment, or you're recovering from surgery, or you absolutely can't hunt, that's a great time to apply for that. For me personally, and I apply all throughout the Western United States, California is my last draw. So it's that last draw that happens for me. So often my entire season is typically planned out. Just as an example, Montana moose, sheep, and bighorn moose, sheep, and mountain goat tags drop today, or the draw results drop today. I know I'm not hunting in Montana now for moose, sheep, or mountain goat. But that said, I'm always in the mindset that I always like to at least have a chance. Now, I've talked about the G3 tag, 4,000 people applying, typically most of those for just those two random tags. I use that as my point only code, meaning that statistically, I'm not going to draw that tag. I'm going to get my point, but lightning strikes occasionally, and you could actually get it. So I'm of the strategy of I don't like to use the point only code, but I haven't come across a situation where I know I absolutely can't hunt. But I like to use those extra long odds draws. That would be a great tag to draw, and I'd solve my scheduling problem if I had to, just to have a chance to draw that tag. That's important. Losing tags, losing points. Again, if you're successful on a premium draw on your first choice, you'll lose your preference points. I think there's a mechanism for losing points if you don't apply for 5 consecutive years for the draw. So I think an application for a deer tag or any of the other tags is about $8. So you can always put in for that point only just to keep building your points. And so you don't lose them in potentially into the future. If you go 5 years, I think at that point they expunge your points.
Perfect. I'll let someone else or ask questions now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm gonna agree with JR. The only time I've ever put in for point only was when I was super pregnant and I knew for sure I wasn't going to be hunting that season. But I'm of the same strategy. I always put in for sort of my dream zone, knowing that I'm likely not going to draw for it. I'm gonna get a point anyway. And then I fill in my second choice for what I'm actually planning on hunting, typically. But anyway, JR, I have another question for you that maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more of an advanced question. And so I'm hoping that you might be able to help us out with what the formula is for us non-math folks to figure out the odds of a particular opportunity.
So the formula is, it's a little bit different between deer and then the big other 3 species. But typically what it is that if you, it's the first round is the preference round. So if there's, let's use easy numbers, if there's 100 tags available, there's 90 that are going to go to the preference round. So if you know that you're in what I would call in the random pool, you're not going to draw in the preference round. The statistics are looking at that is that if there's 10 tags available for the random draw, it's basically 10 divided by the total number of applicants less those that draw the preference. So again, let's use round numbers: 100 tags, 90 to preference, 10 to random, 1,000 applicants. So what you would, if there's a total of 1,000 applicants, well, 90 of those are going to get drawn in the preference. And so there's going to be 910. So it's 10 tags divided by 910. That's a really, really detailed answer. Often what I just say that the quick and easy is literally just taking the total number of applicants divided by the number of random tags available. But if you want to hone in on it a little bit, take the people that you know are going to go out on the preference round and draw. And then if you're on the flip side, if you're thinking that you're in the preference draw and going to have those odds, that's where it's really important to go to that deer drawing statistics page, because what it'll show is how many people are in each of those pools. So let's take X5B, I think it had 19, somebody had 19 points all the way down to 16 points. Well, if you had 16 points last year and you didn't draw, chances are you'll draw this year. Or if you had 15 points last year and you know that you were in the random pool because you didn't meet the preference threshold, you can start to see how many people were in that 15-point category with you and are going to move up and potentially draw that tag. So understanding how many people could potentially be at that preference point, it's a tougher number to identify, but it's in the deer tag drawing statistics and you can look at that. There always is the wild card though, is that people show up, maybe they've only been putting in for point only for years and years and years. And then I'd say my term is they jump off the sidelines. Point only, you're technically on the sidelines, you're not in the game. All of a sudden they come in, may have more points than you. That can skew it a little bit. So hopefully that's a clear enough answer.
I feel like we should have given you a chalkboard for you to write out your little formulas on for us non-math people.
Really just, I mean, it's, you have to understand just some of those allocations. And if you go to the, if you go to the deer drawing statistics within the Big Game Digest, that really, that easy way to really tell, if you know you're not in the preference, just look at the total number of applicants against the total number of random tags. And that's going to give you your ballpark. And that'll give you a perspective of how often.
So JR, can you tell me a little bit about how you're factoring in the impacts of wildfire and drought into the numbers? For example, people may or may not return to an area because of those impacts from last year or the year before. Are you factoring that in?
I am not. That's just one of those human dimension elements that I just don't think you can predict. I know there's an awful lot of tags returned the last couple of years. So there really has been kind of a big shift in some of that and some of those data points. But to me, I feel like it's almost impossible to tell like what's going to happen. Certainly with A zone and B zone, the Mendocino complex of 2020 was a massive shift in area. The Caldor fire in D3 to 5 last year, the Dixie fire. Some of those components are really, really hard to adjust. Now, the one aspect of potential fire and returns that I kind of do look at mentally and put in my head is, number one, fire can typically be very good for habitat, so long as it's not too hot and too intense. But if it burned one year, it may not necessarily burn the next year, so that might be a better chance. We know, and unfortunately, many of our forests are overstocked and we're challenged with drought. So just some rough predictive measures, you can apply them, but it's really, it's really, really challenging to try and determine how people are going to react and what changes people are going to make as a result of it. Now, I think this year will be even harder, because I think we've had 2 years of really big challenging and massive closures these last 2 years. I think ultimately what that will do to people is people will be a little more hesitant. They may not put in for as many draws because they don't want to draw that tag this year, and they'll revert back to maybe a B zone, maybe an A zone, a D3 to 5. Some of those tags that can end up being a little more flexible because they're in the unrestricted level. I definitely see that could be a big possibility, because it can be challenging for somebody that drew a tag that they've been waiting a decade for and unable to hunt. Now, we were able to get tags. Potentially, many people return their tags and were able to get refunds, or not necessarily refunds, but get their points reinstated. So they're still there. But a lot of that data is challenging. Will be challenging to dig into.
So I guess I should say that just because there's a fire in an area doesn't mean there's not hunting opportunities. There is. Hunters just need to probably approach it a little bit differently than they would normally.
Exactly. It all depends on the severity and there's a host of other factors.
All right. Well, that was a great little conversation, guys. Thanks so much for being here, and JR for your expertise, and for Jen and Taylor for your great questions. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I say welcome back because we finished up our conversation with JR on the big game draw, and we started talking to people within the department and even outside, just out and about in life. And we started hearing some questions that we thought would be good to include in this video. So we're inviting JR back, and we're going to ask him some of those questions that we got. And we even got a few people to record them for us. And we're going to start off first with one of our youth hunters, Luca. Now, JR, here are his questions. He has 3, but I'm just going to play them one by one for you. So here's the first one.
How long does it take to get max points?
Max points. So the way California works, max points will ultimately continue to increase every year. So unfortunately, the bad news is that if you didn't start when we started in 2002, you'll never get to max points. However, you will continue to gain points. Now that creates challenges for elk and sheep and pronghorn draws because there's so few of those. But deer tags really, the vast majority of deer tags don't take max points. So you can look forward to trying to plan and take advantage of those deer hunts that you have available. And for the other 3, what I would call the big 3 species, most everyone will be waiting for the draw by chance. So it's not actually a preference point draw because there's just so few tags. Hope that answers your question.
Very good. Okay. And like I said, Luca has a few questions. He's a very inquisitive youth hunter. His next question is here.
What happens if you have max points and you don't want to put in for the draw next year?
if you have max points and you don't want to put in for the draw or any point level really, and you don't want to be in for the draw, there's a code for each of the species. It's called PD, or point only. So you can effectively gain your point for the year, but you won't be have any chance of actually drawing a tag in case you have other plans. Maybe you're hunting out of state, or you just can't hunt this year. So there's always that point only code to use on your draw application. That has to be your first, especially for deer, has to be your first choice on your first application. As we've talked before, put that code in and you'll gain a point for the next year. You'll still be with max. If you're in that category or any other category, you'll gain 1 point for the current year's draw.
All right, and one more question from Luca.
Can I switch my points to a different animal?
Great question, Luca. Unfortunately, no, you can't transfer points. So everybody has points in each individual bucket. We have 4 species: deer, pronghorn, elk, and bighorn sheep. Each species has their own bucket of points, so they know they cannot be transferred.
Okay, we do have a few more people to get through. This one is from a mom, and she introduces herself, so I'm just going to go ahead and play her question for you.
Hi, I'm Jamila from Fair Oaks, California. I'm not a hunter, but my 12-year-old daughter is. My question is, does a licensed hunter need to purchase her tags, or can she do it on her own through her account? Also, is there one spot where I can see which species require tags?
It would be done through every eligible person who is eligible to have a license. So if you can hunt big game, you're 12 years old, you would create an individual account within the CDFW licensing system. For example, my son is, he'll be 12 this year. He has his own account. He gets his unique Go ID number, which is basically your identification number within the system. So they can have their own access, their own login. And that's what my son has. I have my own login, my unique Go ID number. He has his unique login, his unique Go ID number, and all the applications or applications for preference points for the draw, buying tags, habitat stamps, all the other things that you can buy in there will all be linked to your Go ID account and your Go ID number. So each individual licensed hunter will have their own unique account.
And then as far as the second part of her question about where to find species.
Yeah, so the Big Game Digest will host that information that you can read up on in terms of species with points. Again, that falls down to deer, pronghorn, elk, and bighorn sheep. That has that information within, so you can gain that knowledge of which species require or potentially require points, I'll say. And then to monitor your points, to understand how many points you have that you've been building, that is housed online through the CDFW licensing webpage, and that links specifically to the account that you've created for the licensed hunter.
All right, and final question is from a wife of someone in the military.
Hola, mi nombre es Marta, soy de Sacramento, California. Mi esposo está en el ejército y nos van a trasladar un par de años fuera del estado por un despliegue. Nos gustaría saber qué va a pasar con los puntos preferentes que ya tenemos.
JR, I'll help you with this one. I know that she spoke kind of fast there. First of all, Marta, thank you and your family for their service. Thank your spouse for their service for JR and I. JR, she said she's from Sacramento. She has a spouse that is in the military and they're moving out of state for a few years on a deployment. What will happen to preference points that they already have?
Great question. And I believe it's if you have points within California and you do not put in for the draw, I believe it's 5 years that your points will expire. If you don't do anything for 5 years, after 5 years, it will expire. Now, I'll put this caveat, it might be 3 years. I don't know it off the top of my head. Sometimes I get various states mixed up. So, but there is a period there is a period available that if you don't put in, nothing will actually happen. Now, I'd encourage you, if you are moving out of state and you aren't going to hunt, that's a great opportunity to take advantage of that PD code, that point only code, so you can continue to gain points while you're on deployment and out of the state for a few years. That way, when you come back, you haven't skipped a beat. You've still been active within the system, so you're not at risk of losing anything. And then hopefully when you come back from your service, that you have all those opportunities available to you.
Oh man, that is a great tip, JR.
And I just pulled up the Big Game Digest on page 56. There's a great section of Q&As, and it says, when do I lose my preference points? One of the bullet points is you lose all accumulated preference points for any species if you do not participate in the drawing for that species for 5 consecutive years. So dovetailing with what Luca's question was, is that each species has its own bucket. You have to participate in each of those species drawings each year for 5 years, otherwise you would lose them. So if you are out of state for 5 years and you have points for all 4 of our point species, you'll need to put in for point only for each of those species while you're on deployment or out of the state. Make sure that there's no 5 period that ever lapses.
Okay, JR, well, thanks for coming back and answering those questions. We love your expertise, and you're just a great conversation and a person to talk to, especially right before the big game draw.
All right, that does it for this Recruit, Retain, Reactivate, Harvest Huddle Hour. If you have questions for any of our presenters, for the R3 team, or for me, feel free to email us. Again, our email address is r3statewideprogram@wildlife.ca.gov, and we'll be sure to get you answers or put you in contact with those who can. Feel free to also use that email if you have an idea for an upcoming huddle, or if you want to share with us your favorite outdoor photos for our R3 Photo of the Month. Speaking of, thanks to Kelly O and her daughter from Bassett, California on being this month's R3 Photo of the Month with a photo of them out deer hunting in 2021. Kelly, we wish you and your daughter much success in 2022, and thank you for sharing the joy of hunting with the next generation. Until our next huddle, tight lines and straight shooting, thanks for being here.